Hey there, G3XE here, and today I'm posting multiple videos. So you'll have to excuse the camera's not working, so I'm just throwing up some pictures on the screen. I don't know why. It's just when I import the video from the built-in camera on my laptop, it's just a black screen. I don't know. I'll figure it out. But in the meantime, cool artwork from the internet. Today's video is just a RPG kind of theory type thing, specifically about Dungeons and Dragons, but tabletop RPGs in general as well. And that is something I was thinking about, which was um, Dungeons and Dragons, the best and worst example of a role playing game. I often find myself describing what role-playing games are and what my hobby is like. This part of my hobby is like two people who've never heard of it or have heard of Dungeons and Dragons tangentially, but that's about the extent of their experience. I actually love talking to people about this hobby, and I like advocating for it, and I like trying to fight against any social stigma that might exist or still exist from ages past, and I really think that we're seeing a really cool resurgence in a lot of things that were previously considered nerdy, and now are saying, hey, that's cool, you can be into whatever you want, and, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. I think it's awesome, and part of that is Dungeons and Dragons entering more of a mainstream culture, and attached to that, tabletop RPGs. So it is inescapable almost when describing what you do, you know, uh, with your free time, or what you're inviting someone over to do who's never played before, without talking about Dungeons and Dragons. Because usually it's a good footnote to a starting point to say, hey, well, have you heard of the game Dungeons and Dragons? You know what that is, kind of, and people usually might have seen something reference it in TV or pop culture, or may have even known someone who played that. The problem lies within all of the preconceived notions that come with Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not talking about, oh, it's a nerdy game. What I'm talking about is the plethora of dice, the um, the idea of this is a game for people who love reading rule books, and for whom they have stacks of rule books, and that it's super complicated, that it needs lots of math, that people are going to get angry if you don't know how to play, and it's supposed to be this super complicated thing. And to a certain extent, that often happens, unfortunately, in a lot of bad, and I do think they're bad if you play this way, Dungeons and Dragons games, where there's a kind of atmosphere of like, oh, if you're not cool with it, if you don't know what these terms mean, then, oh, we're gonna have to explain it to you, and blah blah blah, and, oh, you're a newbie, play a barbarian, okay, just hit the monster when we tell you to. And it's a toxic kind of mentality, and it doesn't allow for growth within the RPG community, because so many more people could be playing tabletop RPGs, especially kind of the younger generation coming up. And we're seeing, this kind of like hipster almost, resurgence in like, hey, nerdy things are cool. And so it's the perfect time to get people to play these games. And there's so many different genres and so many different games. So in one way, Dungeons and Dragons is the best example because people know it, and people have an immediate footnote, and people like Lord of the Rings, and they can, and it gives them an example. But on the other hand, it comes with all of this baggage of saying, that's what a role-playing game is? Oh, I'm okay. I'd rather not read a 100-page rule book. I'd rather not learn the difference between a D8, D4, D6, D10, D100, D20. And then you have all these systems. You have Fate. You have, uh, the I don't know. There's a bunch of them. Like, for whatever reason, they're escaping me. But there's tons of different engines that tabletop RPGs run on that aren't as complicated, and there are some very complicated ones as well. and there's nothing wrong with liking those, but I do think we need more kind of uh, games that bridge that gap. And I've been trying to stay away from using Dungeons and Dragons when I'm describing this type of thing. I might say it's like, if you've heard of Dungeons and Dragons, it's like that, but when I'm saying, oh, what do you mean RPG or tabletop RPG? What do you do? And I'm describe that. Oh, it's like a movie that you get to be one of the characters, and that you get to invest in that character, and you get to see that character grow, and you have stake in the story and can influence the story, both in and out of character. And it's half, or it's part acting, and it's part um, strategy, and it's not strategy in the sense of, oh, if I put this feat here and get this +2, then I get this. It's strategy in the sense of, there is a fort, and it's held by orcs, and they patrol it both day and night. And they have archers posted at these points. How do we get in there? How do we do this? And that those ideas of those really cool creative moments when you say, like when I had in my Malam's Maze campaign, when they said, well, what if one of the people was like, what if I go in as their prisoner and then I try and break out from the inside? And everyone looks at them like, okay, I guess you could try that. He's like, all right, I'm gonna go do that. And you're like, all right, I guess he's going to do that. And then either triumphant victory follows or hilarious defeat. But there's so much to the hobby, and it doesn't have to be fantasy. It can be so many different genres. So I'd like to know people's opinions. Is Dungeons and Dragons the best example, the worst example of an RPG? Is it useful because of its cultural relevance, or is it harmful because of its cultural relevance? Let me know. Thanks.